So about 5 years ago, my dentist changed my life. And I need to point out that I have a terrible fear of dentists. And any time that I spend in their presence tends to be sweating and nervous and emotional. And when a dentist speaks to me, I tend to be in a state of high alert. And on this particular occasion, as I was leaving, the dentist called out to me and he said, "Nicholas, remember, floss the teeth you want to keep." And I left almost in a sprint, as I always do. And 3 weeks later, I couldn't get his words out of my mind. Floss the teeth you want to keep. You just can't break apart the logic of it. It's too perfect, because if you want to keep all your teeth, you have to floss all your teeth as well. And so that piece of advice sparked me to make a very big decision. I decided to start flossing my teeth. And what I learned in making that decision was the simplest change, something that took 20 or 30 seconds once a day, with a very, very high incentive as in keeping all my teeth. Something that simple ended up taking a long time to change. It actually took me a number of months before it became a habit. And then once it was a habit, that sparked for me something that lasted about 5 years, the last 5 years, which is that I've started changing not just the way I floss, but every part of my life that needed improvement, from the way I read, to the way I sleep, to the way I work and eat and exercise and even interact with family and friends. So for the last 5 years, I've been obsessed with this question. How do you change yourself? And what's interesting about this question, and what I've realized in that 5 years, is that the answer to that question actually has everything to do with the future of the world. And the reason it has everything to do with the future of the world is that because many of us aren't coming up with a good answer for that every day. And as a result, many of us are living ourselves to death. And if you look at the statistics in Australia, by 2023, diabetes will be the leading disease burden in this country. Smoking continues to be the leading cause of ill health, a leading preventable cause of ill health and death. 60% of us are overweight or obese. And when we look to the US, things aren't much better. They're actually a lot worse. In the US, the top 6 killers of Americans are lifestyle diseases. And all of this is traced to a combination of not eating right, not sleeping right, working too much, not exercising right, and not living a healthy life. So I've been thinking, how do we come up with a better answer for this? How do we come up with a better answer for the question, how do you change yourself? And we have kind of two options. One is to maintain the status quo and do nothing. And if we do that, we know what's going to happen. We only have to look to the US for that. But if we decide to change, there's something working in our favour, and that's these two Danish twins. Because the Danish twin study establishes that about 10% of how long we live is determined, about 10% of how long we live is determined by our genes, and about 90% of how long we live is determined by our lifestyles. But working against us are a couple of factors, and the first one is our evolution. You see, all throughout human history, we've had these problems of scarcity: not enough food, not enough shelter, not enough security. And we've developed evolutionary mechanisms to survive, to make it through those days that we didn't have food. For example, when we find good sources of calories, things that are high in fat, salt and sugar, our body floods with dopamine and serotonin so that our brains know that's a good thing to eat. And it's kind of a wonderful thing, because that's what's kept us alive to this point. But in 2011, that same evolutionary mechanism is now working against us. So we don't have a problem of scarcity, we have a problem of plenty. And the problem of plenty, we haven't developed yet a good system for how to deal with this. So this is a beautiful problem to have. This is a remarkable testament to human progress. But it started to work, that mechanism started to work against us. And there's something else that's working against us, and that's technology. And what technology's done is collapse the time between impulse and gratification. See, there was a time when, as a society, we had to defer gratification until the afterlife. And then at some point we went, actually, you know what, that's too long. And now we live in a world where we get what we want when we want it, even when we don't have the money to pay for it. And what that does is it makes us overvalue short-term rewards and undervalue long-term goals. And that in turn makes it really hard to change. So how do you floss the teeth you want to keep? Well, what I want to talk about today, I think 10 things that most improve our ability to change. But first, I want to talk about a couple of myths that exist around change. And these are the things that I think people get most wrong when they start talking about what it takes to change. So the first is that change is an on-off switch. And that's how I thought when I decided I was going to floss. Because I thought by deciding to floss that therefore I would be a flosser. And that's not the case. It was actually reasonably difficult to become a flosser. What I realised is change is actually a lot more like a muscle. And for most of us, it's a muscle that's very weak. But the good news is we can improve its strength over time. There's a fascinating study done which proves this point about change being a muscle. It's a little bit complicated, so you're going to have to bear with me. So just come on a journey and imagine with me. Imagine that up here we have a table. And on the table we have a bowl of cookies and we have a bowl of radishes. Now, I'm going to split the room in two. And there's a simple rule for you guys. You guys can eat all the cookies you want. But you're not allowed to eat the radishes, okay? Remember, I split the room, and on this side there's another simple rule for you guys. You can have all the radishes you like, but you're not allowed to touch the cookies. Now I'm going to leave the room for 15 minutes. Unbeknownst to you, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to tempt you guys to come up and eat some cookies. Now when they did this study in real life, amazingly, none of you ate the cookies. But you have to imagine these cookies filling the room with a beautiful scent and a smell, and that the whole time that you're out of the room, that I'm out of the room, you're wanting those cookies so badly. Anyway, I'm going to come back in the room. Unbeknownst to you, I'm going to give you a puzzle. All of us are going to do a puzzle. And unbeknownst to you, the puzzle has no solution. So we're not testing you for, can you solve the puzzle? We're testing you for, how long will you persist? Now, when this study happened in real life, the cookie eaters, who'd done no resistance because no one wants to eat a radish, they persisted at that puzzle for 19 minutes. And the people who had to resist the cookies, the radish eaters, they only lasted for 8 minutes. So what was happening? Well, it turned out that in the 15 minutes that I'd left the room, you guys had spent all your energy, your self-control energy, your change energy. You'd used up that change muscle. And so when it came time to apply it again, to apply it to a complex puzzle, you were exhausted. You couldn't do it. And so this is so important to understand, that change is an exhaustible resource. Change is like a muscle. But there's a second myth that I want to talk about. And that is, most people think the ability to change is somehow predetermined. And that's also false. The ability to change can be improved. There's a great famous study called the marshmallow study that proves this. So again, come on a journey with me. Imagine we're testing small children for their ability to defer self-gratification. We're going to put them in a room by themselves and we're going to give them a marshmallow. And the rule for the children is, if you don't eat the marshmallow for 10 minutes, you get a second marshmallow. And then we leave the room. Now, what's interesting about this study is that the scientists tracked these children throughout their lives. And what they found was the ability to defer self-gratification was actually a better indicator of success in later life than IQ. So what was the difference between the kids? Because all the kids wanted the marshmallow exactly the same. The desire wasn't different between the two. What the researchers found was that the children who succeeded because they were able to strategically allocate their attention elsewhere. And so they were succeeding because of technique. And this is true, that what the children would do, and there's videos of this on YouTube, is that they'd cover their eyes, they'd sing songs from Sesame Street, or they'd hide under the table. Now, the children who failed also, most often, were failing because of their technique. And what they'd do is they'd say, right, well, this is my goal and I'm going to just stare at it because I really want it, but I'm just going to hold out. And every time they decided just to stare at it, they failed. Now, they did a follow-up study, and this time they said to all the kids, before they went in, they gave them just a simple trick. They said, imagine that marshmallow doesn't really exist. Imagine it's sitting within a frame. Imagine it's just a picture of a marshmallow. And on the second time around, every child made it 10 minutes. So what's fascinating about this is if we can give a child a simple trick like putting a marshmallow in a frame, and we can make them resist a marshmallow for 10 minutes, then there's probably things in our lives that we can do to help ourselves change. And so I've chosen 10 things that I think, in my experience in the last 5 years, that have helped me and that I've seen helped others, that make change easier. So the first is that it's easier to add a new behaviour than stop an old one. Cold turkey, and there's studies that show this, is often the best way to solve something. But cold turkey is so hard. Cold turkey is the bastion of change experts. And if you're like me and you're a beginner at this change stuff, it's much better to avoid cold turkey. It's much better just to add something new rather than stop something old. The second thing to consider is that just make a single change for a fixed time. And this is why New Year's resolutions are the great failures of change. Because you get to your New Year's resolutions and you make a long list. And you charge into that first week of January and you're the best person in the world because you're giving more to charity. You're getting up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym. You're mowing the lawns. You're home on time and you're eating amazingly well. But then you get to the end of that first week and you're absolutely exhausted and you say, well, actually, I don't think I can do about half of them, but I'll just, pop them away, rationalise away why you can't do them. At the end of the second week, you've got half a list left. And at the end of the third week, you're absolutely exhausted. And by the end of that first month, you give up. You say, you know what, this is just not my year, I'll do it next year. And there's a very good reason why gym memberships spike in January and gym attendance falls in February. So make a single change. Don't overload your change muscle. The second point on that is that when you're making a change, the brain can't handle the thought of a change for eternity, but the brain can handle the thought of change for a fixed time. And I think the best fixed time to pick is 6 weeks, because a habit takes 21 days to form. And if you're like me, probably won't hit 21 days first off. So let's say you make it a week the first time, 2 weeks the second time, and 3 weeks the next. Then you'll get your 21 days. Then you'll get your habit. But it takes 6 weeks to get there. So add a behaviour, add a single behaviour, and add it for 6 weeks. The other really important thing to remember is baby steps. Because most of us go, my goal is to run a marathon, my goal is to lose 115 pounds, my goal is to, these huge, huge goals. And we set ourselves up to fail because the first day that we don't achieve those goals, we feel like a failure, and the next day we're not there and we feel like a failure. We want to remove that guilt and that failure from change. So if you break down goals into activities, then you're able to see you're able to compartmentalise the little things that you need to do to reach the big goal. But even when you're thinking about activities, the important thing is baby steps. Baby steps are just so crucial. Because when you create a baby step, you make it almost impossible for yourself not to succeed. And over time, you create these chains of success. And the longer your chain of success is, the less likely it is to break. So you want to create these long chains of change. You want to just be successful day after day rather than setting yourself up to fail with a massive goal. There's a 15th thing to think about, and it's to create triggers for new behaviours. So when I wanted to floss, my trigger was brushing my teeth. If I was brushing my teeth, I knew the very next thing I had to do was to floss. And people have great triggers, like waking up is the trigger to walk the dog, or sitting down at the table is the trigger to have a glass of water. And if you create triggers, you increase you increase the likelihood that you'll do the new behaviour. Moving backwards in time and moving forwards in time. So triggers. They say measure what matters. And this is one of the key things to remember, is that if you're going to change, create a tangible external measurement for the change. There's a movement at the moment called the quantified self movement. And it's a group of people who are using the power and proximity of smartphones to track all elements of their life, whether it's how they sleep or how much caffeine they ingest or whatever it is. These are the change experts. What we can learn from them is that measuring change increases the likelihood that you'll succeed at it. And the best kind of change, I think, is a calendar with crosses on it, because that's how you create a visual chain of change. 7th thing, never change alone. Changing is hard enough as it is, but when you add someone else to the mix, you get encouragement, you get support, you get someone to pick you up when you're down, and you get the added opportunity to pick someone else up when they're down. And changing together makes it much easier. Number 8 is don't forget the sticks. The science of loss aversion tells us that we hate losing $100 about twice as much as we love winning $100. And we can use that to our advantage. Because when people say, I can't change that, I sometimes think, well, maybe your incentives aren't high enough. Because if I said, I've got a gun and I don't want you to blink, you'd probably blink pretty quickly. If I had a gun and I said, you've got to walk the dog every day, chances are the dog will be fit before too long. So don't forget the sticks. Don't forget the little things that incentivize you in a negative way. And I ran a similar version of this experiment on myself. So what I did was I had a particular job that was going to take 6 months. And I figured out that I needed to do about 4 hours a day of it, and I didn't want to do any of those hours, but I had to do it. So I approached a colleague. I gave him $250 in $5 $50 notes. I said, at any point in time, if you see me not doing this between 8 and 12 in the morning, I want you to take one of these $50 notes and I want you to burn it. And I'm telling you, at the end of 6 months, he gave me back $250. Because the thought to me of burning $50 of my hard-earned money that I was doing this godforsaken work for just was too much to consider. So the ninth point's maybe the most important. The Framingham study tells us that if 3 of our closest friends are obese, there's a 50% chance we'll be obese too. And we can do all the things that we've mentioned today, but if we don't consider the impact of our environment, the impact of our house, of our pantry, of our fridge, of our workplace, of our route to work, if we don't consider the impact of that on our ability to change, then we make all of the other changes, all of the other techniques less effective. The 10th and final point is really important, and that's that change takes patience. We are geared to expect massive change and to be very disappointed when it doesn't happen. And that's not how change happens. That's not a formula that's ever worked for anyone. The only change that's ever worked is slow, incremental change over time. That's the only way to make it sustainable. So floss the teeth you want to keep. By being in this room today, we qualify as people who care about the future of the world. We qualify as people who are interested in the big challenges of inequity and sustainability and education and health. We all live our lives so that our children and their children can inherit a better world. But I don't want to walk into that world bloated and tired or hungover. I don't want to walk into it cranky and weighed down by a lack of energy. I want to walk into that world at full force with the fullest versions of ourselves. And the fullest versions of ourselves starts with a simple single change. Floss the teeth you want to keep. Thanks.